Hi, podcast listeners. Welcome to the A World of Difference podcast. We have so many guests on this show making a difference in our lives, making a difference all around the world with the expertise that they bring. And yet so many of you are reaching out to me saying, you want more. It's not enough just what we're putting on these podcast episodes for you. And so I am here to extend a very warm welcome to you to our Difference Maker community, where you can join for as little as $5 a month to get all this extra content. Out the gate, you're going to get 30 plus minisodes of exclusive content not available for the regular podcast listeners, and an exclusive minisode every month. And you'll get exclusive voting power to help us pick podcast topics and more. And that's at our Changers tier. There's 3 different main tiers and then an extra larger tier. But whatever tier that you join at, you will be included in this extra content. And I know that many of you are wanting to go a little bit deeper. And so even though it gets a little wild in there sometimes because of how deep we go, I want you to join us there. This extra content is very special. It means a great deal to me to be a part of this community with you. And I would love to just exchange ideas or perspectives that you have around these different episodes. And that's the place where we do it. So please show up to our Difference Maker community. Give us $5 out of your pocket every month. And I think that you'll have a lot of fun in there because we do. And I would love for you to join us. So go to patreon.com/A World of Difference to join us there. Welcome to the A World of Difference podcast. I'm your hostess, Lori Adams Brown, and you are listening to episode 34. On today's episode, we have Pastor Beth Leach. She is a pastor at Christ Church of Oak Brook in the western suburbs of Chicago. She previously was here in California and served as a senior pastor of First Church of the Nazarene of Pasadena, which is affectionately referred to as PASNAZ here in California. And she's a graduate of Olivet Nazarene University and also Northern Theological Seminary. She's a writer for Missio Alliance, and she has written for publications such as Christianity Today, Christian Week, and Jesus Creed. She's also an author of a book called Emboldened, but this newest book she has written is called Radiant Church, and she's going to talk to us about that today and all of the things that God has laid on her heart to see the church around the world, but particularly here in America, and especially white evangelicalism, which is sort of her tribe, just her call toward the church becoming more purified and setting a higher bar for ourselves. So that's sort of what her book, Radiant Church, is about. She's very passionate about this and had it on her heart here when she was in California and even into the move into Chicago as she saw the church, going through so much and just this longing to see radiance. But it turns out it was such a timely book that we all needed to have in our hands at this point in time to read and see how God was already preparing her in a prophetic way to write things that we needed to hear. And she's going to bring that to the podcast today and talk to us about her passion to see a radiant church. So welcome to today's show and to the World of Difference podcast, Beth Leach. Hi, Beth. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Lori. I am so happy to be here today.
Me too. We just have so much in common because we've both been pastoring as women in California, but I know you recently moved somewhere else. But a lot of my listeners know who you are, but there are many probably who've never heard of you. So I'd love for you just to give us a little introduction, like tell us about yourself and your background and your family and what you're currently doing.
Yeah, so I am a pastor who deeply loves the church, loves Jesus, and loves what I do. And that is pastoring and shepherding a people. I often say that I'm a pastor who has written before. I don't consider myself a career author. I am a pastor who's written books simply because I love the church and I want to see the church live into the fullest. I'm also a mom. I have 2 boys, Caleb and Noah. They are 9 and 11 years old. Been married to my husband, Jeff, for 15 years. And we currently reside in Chicago, where I am a pastor of missional living at a church in Oak Brook called Christ Church. And previously, I was a senior pastor at a church called First Church of the Nazarene of Pasadena, or affectionately known as PADS-NAZ. And we thought we were there for the very long haul until in the very beginning of 2020, my dad came down with stage 4 stomach cancer, and then my mom with Alzheimer's, and then, everything else happening in the world. I just reached a moment where I said, Lord, something's got to give. I had been flying from Pasadena to Chicago twice a month to get back here to care for my parents, and pastoring a turnaround church and caring for my folks was just too much. And so a door opened for us to come back to Chicago so I could be near my folks, and here we are.
Yeah, I know that had to have been a really difficult journey. I mean, COVID would be just enough. The pandemic would have been just enough. But so many people's stories are layers upon layers of what people went through last year. So I know that that had to have been tough on you to make that decision. And yet at the same time, your pastoral heart, I'm sure, was something your family really needed in this time. And so, yeah, those are really hard decisions. And I think it's important to even recognize the decisions that women pastors face that might in some ways even be unique in that scenario,
Yep. Yep.
where it might
That's
look a
right.
certain way or even be misunderstood because of how we perceive pastoring to be. So I know that must have been a really hard decision.
Yeah, it was, and oftentimes, when it comes to care for the parents, it does fall on the daughters. I do have 2 brothers, and it just, the way the dynamics worked out and the way that things unfolded, it became apparent that it needed to be me to move home to care for my folks. And I do think those are some of the hidden dynamics that women in ministry often face that aren't always recognized. In addition, to the many other demands that we carry, but that happened to be one of them for me.
Yeah. Well, I know that you have this most recent book that you've written called Radiant Church. And in this book, I love it, by the way. I think I've underlined every single page. It's just so good and so
Thank you
timely.
so much.
Of course. No, I mean, really, it's just, it's a, we look at a book like that, we read a book like that, and we just realize God was using you even before we knew all of the things that were going to unfold to speak to the church for this time. And in the book, you're really calling us as the church to a much higher standard. And I see that you focus on various aspects and call us to lament and also to bring change. And one of the things you say in there toward the beginning of the book is it seems we have been more wrapped up in ABC of empire, attendance, building, cash, than we have been in participating in the mission of God. And so I'd love for you to take us into your thoughts on this, if you would.
Yeah, around 2018, my heart became so burdened at the state of the church in North America. And it wasn't that it wasn't burdened before that, but for me, I really began to experience things on the front lines in a very real way. In addition, so many things within the church across America were being exposed. There were moral failures, abuse of power was being exposed, and just so much of the decaying and toxic systems that were once something that we stood on and knew so well, they were being exposed in ways that were troubling and concerning. And for me as a pastor, I just said, something is just not right here. And when I talk about this idea of ABCs of the empire, that's not a phrase I came up with. It's something that just a lot of pastors talk about, attendance, building, and cash. These are the things that are kind of the holy grail, right? If we are pastoring a church that has a lot of attendance, if we have a great building and cash, and we've arrived. And this is something that is formed within the imagination of so many of evangelicals in our world today. For me, I remember the very first time I walked into the doors of Willow Creek Church, this mega church outside of Chicago. I was in my early 20s, and I thought, this is it. This is what church is to be. If I pastor a church like this someday, or if a church reaches this point, well, then they've arrived. And something was being formed in my imagination that was painting the picture of what success is, which turns out is not necessarily the vision of success in the kingdom. Success in the kingdom is flipped up on its head. It's very upside down. And through the years, and again, this exposing that I talked about, that I started to see in 2018, obviously it comes back so much further than that. I'm not the first one to point it out. I'm not the first one to write about it. I'm not the first one to have a concern. This goes way, way, way back. But this exposing is what we began to discover is this idea of, a lot of attendance, building, and cash. Well, the curtains were pulled back, and what we discovered is that these churches that maybe had a lot of people in their rooms or butts in the seat, turns out there were some really toxic and destructive things happening behind the scenes.
Yeah. And it's so disappointing for so many. And I know that when you mentioned Willow Creek, I've interviewed Scott McKnight and Laura Behringer about their experience there, and then also Nancy Ortberg as well. And, it's often the experience of being a congregant and then being in the inside, like you said, behind the curtain, so to speak, aren't the same. So you were seeing, from the outside in this building, everything looks so wonderful. And in some cases, it's not like that. And so, yeah, you talk about success. So let's camp out on that for a little bit. You say success becomes what we produce. And sadly, the people we are trying to reach are commodified and objectified. The people of God become a means to an end, like machines on an assembly line. While it might feel good to have a room full and worship space similar to a concert venue, this and of success sadly fuels our own egos. So unpack this, how that affects the ego of leaders in this scenario and people who are on an assembly line, like a machine.
Yeah, it becomes a really fine line, and it's a tension that we as pastors have to be aware of, especially, in the context of the Western world where everything is about production. It's about strategic plans. It's about growth. And, to an extent, like, as kingdom people, we do want to care about, going therefore and making disciples. We are Great Commission people. And I think it's important that we remember that. We want to go and be witnesses, to the ends of the earth. And also at the same time, I think there's a shadow side to all of this because we are broken and we have taken, so many ideas, I guess, from capitalism, if you will, of commodifying people, of objectifying people, of seeing people as, as I said, as a means to an end. And the ultimate goal then is to have people in a room. And so if the ultimate goal then is to have people in a room or butts in a seat, then we look for the right levers to pull to get there. Can we have better music? Can we have a fog machine? Can we have the cool coffee shop? Can we have, and we go down the list, and I'm not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. By the way, I am on staff at a church that happens to have a lot of these things, but the problem is what is the goal? What are we trying to do here? And even bigger than that is what is the vision of success that we are bowing down to? And I think that this idea of success has become idolatrous. This vision of success has become idolatrous in so many of our churches, and we're losing sight for what it is that we're doing and what it is that we're after.
Yeah, I like how you said that you're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. There's nothing wrong inherently with a fog machine or good coffee, but if that is the goal to get people in, I certainly agree that God's kingdom is so much bigger than all of this. And you say, in your book, you talk about, money and success that could be, and that are actually in some cases standing in the way of particular segments of certain churches in the U.S., being the kind of radiant church God is calling us to be. And you say, when money is weaponized, pastors are tempted to forsake truth telling in an effort to not upset the constituents. So why do you think this is so important right now in today's church?
Yeah, it's so hard because, this is something that is very personal to me because it's something that I've experienced firsthand. Most pastors have probably experienced someone coming into their coming into their office and saying, well, I give this amount and you don't want to lose me. And money is weaponized. It's used as a threat. Do you know what would happen if we left? And so because pastors' well-being is so connected to the giving of a congregation, pastors can at times become terrified. If they speak truth, if they speak up, if they tell the congregation the truth about who they are or their idols, it feels dangerous. And my husband and I experienced this in very real and in very painful ways. A couple of examples. When I first got to Paznaz, we did a sermon series called The Politics of Jesus. And this was in 2016, right at the start of the 2016 election. And for this series, The Politics of Jesus, I thought, what's the harm in talking about Jesus as king and giving our people a healthy vision of their posture in this world as citizens of the kingdom first? That the kingdom of God is enacted through King Jesus and God's people and not through a, say, political party. You would think that that would not be a dangerous thing to talk about, but it was.
Wow.
It was incredibly dangerous. And guess what? That was connected to people leaving, which was connected to tithes and offerings. And that felt very scary.
Yeah, I can imagine.
It's costly. It feels costly for pastors to speak truth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And as the more polarized in the United States and even some other places around the world are getting, I imagine it's increasing. COVID certainly threw a wrench in things because online isn't maybe the same kind of giving. I don't know how people are experiencing that, but I know that's had its own challenges. So, my heart does go out to all the pastors who are having to make those decisions like you had to make in that scenario. And also, like you mentioned, if a pastor does have a sin, and maybe they do need to go for counseling, but they're afraid for people to even know what it is. And they do need to get healthy because after all, they're just a human being, a fallible human being.
Yeah.
Maybe they do have an idol and maybe that idol is money. Or it is that this, huge church they've built might crumble. And there's too much of their identity tied to this church, a dream they had, and it's all gone the way they wanted, and then that idol gets, how do you deal with that idol in a way that wouldn't be scary? It's terrifying, I'm sure.
Right. We need to have a more robust ecclesiology and more of a level hierarchy, right? We've created just this really scary hierarchy that makes we don't recognize power dynamics are at play in a congregation when in reality, the cross is supposed to level these power dynamics. And we look at, spiritual authority more as a hierarchy rather than influence.
Yeah.
Right. Pastors are to lead by influence.
Yeah.
They not by title,
right,
but rather influence. And so these power dynamics make things really scary in congregations. And then when you connect power dynamics to money and to givers, that also can feel really scary and dangerous and cause a lot of toxicity within churches.
Yes, absolutely. One of the things I like about the way you word things, even back in your book, Emboldened, that are things that I often talk about too. And now that I've been in the US, I'm seeing it in a different way because of some of the dynamics in this culture. But, I think we would agree that there's only one king, right? For those of us who follow Jesus, that's like, there's one, it's Jesus.
Right.
And yet some churches make their pastors like a king. Even Jesus as king wasn't like King Herod. You talk about this in your book and you say, one king made grand entrances and the other's entrance was humble. And yet it was Jesus who attracted the wise men from the east, not Herod. And so, my question for you is, how can we start to follow a humble king again in light of all this?
Right. It begins by, and this sounds so cliche, right? But it begins by really, truly submitting to King Jesus. and to getting to know the revelation of God fully revealed in Jesus at the cross. And, that getting to know the revelation of God in Christ happens in so many different ways. It happens in community. It's revealed in the church. It happens in worship. What's our liturgy like? When you walk into a worship space, even, and the way the room is set up and the things that you're hearing, the things that you're saying, the things that you're praying, the liturgy that you're reciting, the songs that you are singing, the sermons that you are hearing is all forming a people. It's forming a church, and it's forming the congregation. And are we forming our people into, the ways of this world? Or are we forming our people into this Christ likeness, the way of the humble King? But even, further than that, when we think about through the lens of the individual Christian, what am I surrounding myself with? As a pastor, I so often said to our church, turn off the news. Turn off the news. If we spent as much time, and I know this sounds like I'm over spiritualizing and on my high horse, but I really mean this. What if we were reading the Gospels as much as we were watching talk radio or Fox News or CNN or MSNBC? Because it seems to me that the priest has become the news anchor or whatever news talk show that we are listening to. They're the ones that are forming us. No wonder why we're way out of whack in our world today.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So true. It's almost like we don't even understand anymore if we have been so inundated in our brains, maybe even brainwashed in some cases by the news channels that we watch in the US. We're not even sure what a leader is supposed to look like anymore.
Right.
Because it's just been this generation has just had so many toxic messages on what leadership is. And when we get back to this humble King of Jesus, where really servant leadership, it's emphasis on servant, right? But we've just not seen that the way that we should. I mean, I know we as a church, we're intended, as you say in your book, to give a preview of God's kingdom. And you ask, are we giving them a preview of leaders who misuse and abuse power? Are we giving them a preview of a kingdom that applauds the voices of the superpowers and casts aside the meek? What does this mean to you as you say that?
Yeah, whether we realize it or not, the ways that we are living in community, the things that we do, the things that we worship, the ways that we interact with one another, the world is watching. We are bearing witness to something. And I would encourage, any listener, when they think of, in particular, evangelicalism in the United States, if they have a friend or family member who doesn't identify as Christian, and if you were to ask them, what do you think of Christians? What do you think of the church these days? More than likely, they're going to get a pretty negative response, at least, and maybe it's just my circle.
No,
maybe it's just my circle, but the people that I tend to rub shoulders with aren't fans of what's happening within the church, or in particular. And the reason why I say in particular evangelicalism is because in this book, that's who I'm critiquing, because that's what I know. I'm a child of white evangelicalism. And my hope throughout this book is that we would be able to paint a more robust picture of how the church is to live, that those who find themselves within white evangelicalism would take the steps to live into that robust vision that Jesus says, we can be, or who Jesus says we are. But so backing up, a lot of people that I know look at us and say, yeah, Jesus sounds cool and all, but this whole church thing, I'm just not feeling, I'm just not into it. And I want to say back to them, yeah, I can't blame you, because a lot of the things that you're hearing and seeing on the news, yeah, it's repulsive. And yeah, I'm also embarrassed. And yeah, I'm also sad. And I'm also lamenting. And I'm lamenting why? Because our witness is diminished. The things that they are hearing, the things that they are seeing, that is not who Jesus calls us to be. And what's even more concerning is things that they are seeing and the things that they are hearing, it's being defended. by the perpetrators. It's being defended, it's being protected. And so not only are they seeing just some really toxic things and abuse of power, but they're also seeing it being defended. And so we have to ask ourselves as Christians right now who are within this world of evangelicalism, we have to ask, what kind of preview are we giving the world? And when I say preview, we are called to bear witness of this new heaven and new earth, that someday there will be a world of no more pain, of no more sorrow, of no more aches, of no more racism, of no more bitterness and dissension, and on and on and on. That's what we're called to bear witness to. And are we bearing witness to that? Or are we more of a reflection of the toxic and decaying systems of this world? What kind of preview are we giving?
Wow. Yeah, it's so true. And it is heartbreaking, because if we're honest and we hear these things from those who are, as you said, who seem to think Jesus was a great guy and worth learning from, worth following, but want nothing to do with the church that God intended us to be, like something is not right. You ask in your book, are we putting an emphasis on attracting our neighbors through glitzy worship services and good preaching, but forgetting about our very ordinary yet weird call to offer something the world can't offer? So how can we do better here in this way?
Yeah. Well, we have some really hard things to do first. It's not just about changing our methodology. And I sit in so many meetings where we're constantly talking about our methodology. And I think that we need to go back and we need to name some things. We need to repent of some things. We need to lament of some things. And so we need to go and we need to just, be totally open and surrendered and corporately pray that prayer of examine.
Yeah.
And say, Lord, search our hearts. How have we participated in things that have harmed my neighbor, that have harmed people of color, that have marginalized people, that have silenced victims? What has been our part in that? And this prayer of corporate examine is not just, going into a room in silence and saying, okay, Lord, speak. But examine happens in community by listening to one another. It's by going to those who are saying, you know what, I love Jesus and all, but I just can't do the church. Well, why?
Yeah.
We need to find out why.
Yeah.
With an open and humble heart and learn how we've hurt them. And so this process of examine is listening to those we've hurt. It's listening to our neighborhood. It's listening to our world. And then boldly accepting those things where we have fallen short, where we have messed up, where we have dropped the ball, where we have hurt someone, and then confessing. Boldly confessing them and then lamenting. And this process of confession and lament is so important.
Yeah.
Because when we skip those steps, we are allowing the status quo to stay as it is. And it's just going to keep being perpetuated from one generation to the next. Yeah. But when we begin to lament, we are actually saying the status quo was not okay. And it's time that we lament it. So that way we can then begin the process of repentance. And repentance is that turning away from the status quo that has been so harmful and toxic and full of idolatry. And as we begin this process of repentance, then we can begin to root ourselves in richer soil, rooted in the narrative of the gospel and the kingdom that brings about healing and unity. And so, this movement that I long to see in the church, which I believe is possible, won't come without really hard things first. And those are all things that none of us like to do.
No one. I don't like to do them. I don't know anyone that likes to do
right.
them. That's
right.
like, it's like, exposing yourself for all the bad things you've done. I think we, as Christians, we want to show all our good side. I mean, it's human beings. Nobody wants to show your junk, and it's definitely not your corporate generational foothold that became a stronghold kind of junk, like that kind of stuff. The idols. My experience overseas, whatever spiritual realm I was walking into, and everywhere around the world has its own various forms of worship and worshiping different types of things. I mean, literal idols, in a lot of places I've lived, and, um, where incense is burned and, offerings are made. But the ones in the US are not so obvious. You're not going to walk by a little thing that has some mandarin oranges in front of it, but the idols are certainly still there in the church. And
Yep.
my
They're more
experience,
insidious.
they are. And my experience is the more, if you ever, pray for people to be released from the grips of an idol or the stronghold of that, like it gets nasty. Like there's
Mhm.
accusations thrown at you.
Yep.
You might even be physically harmed. Like it's,
Mhm.
our battles aren't against flesh and blood from what we understand in the scriptures. It's like, we're not fighting people here. This is like a
Yep.
spiritual thing happening. And so you say in your book, our call as Christians isn't to build it so they will come, but to flip the world on its head through ordinary acts of love and mercy and generosity. And so help us imagine a better way to do this, if you would.
Yeah. So I think so often it's about come to us, like let us attract you, with the glitz um I've always been so drawn to this quote by Shane Claiborne where he says the seeds of the gospel are very small. They're found at the kitchen tables and in the neighborhood. And he talks about, that's the vision that we have in Jesus, who moved into the neighborhood. It's everyday, ordinary Christians moving into their neighborhood with acts of love and kindness, and bearing witness to a very good God through their hands, through their feet. And so, what I long to see the church do is do a better job at actually equipping our people not to be consumers, but are equipping our people to be sent ones, to bear witness, to go, to be the hands and feet of Jesus, to love their neighbor, to be the good Samaritan, to help the widow and the orphan, to feed the hungry. That in such a way that in the ways that Christians are going out into the world, that the world would take notice and say, you know what? There's something really beautiful about you. What is it? And that's when we get to say, you know, it's Jesus. That is when we get to say it because they saw it in our lives first. And then we get to proclaim something so good and so beautiful that was attractive, not by our building or not by the amount of people in a room or not just by our programs, but that was attractive because of the character and the witness of the people.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with so many things you just said there. I mean, the scriptures tell us they will know we are Christians by our love. And if that's not like kind of a preeminent, value in our cultures of our churches, something's not quite right. But you do tell this great story, which I love in the book, about Peace Lutheran Church, where they canvassed their neighborhood with flyers offering free help, not flyers to invite them into a service, like everybody come. It was everybody go. And they went out and they offered free help. So, tell us about that story and maybe even how we could emulate from this story the combination of both the Great Commission and the Great Commandment.
Yeah, this is an incredible story, and uh, at the end of the bibliography, you can see the link to more about that story. But this is a story of a church, Peace Lutheran Church. I think it was Minnesota. I cannot remember, but again, it's there in the book. They were a church about to close the doors, and a pastor came in. I think there may be like a dozen people left in the church. And, they were going round and round. How are we going to attract people? How are we going to get them to come? And the pastor said, well, how about instead of thinking about how are we going to get them to come, how about we just go to them? And this small, little, almost near dying church did exactly that. They went into the neighborhood and they started putting out flyers all throughout the neighborhood. We just want to help you. No strings attached. And they slowly started caring and loving their neighbors. They were putting on new roofs. They were renovating houses for people who didn't have the means or for the elderly. And yes, the church did happen to start growing from there, but not because they were telling people to come to the building, but they were just getting out there in the neighborhood, in proximity, rubbing shoulders with people and loving people. And it was just a beautiful story that captivated me when I read it. And so I hope others who are listening would find this story, the link at the end of the bibliography, and go and check it out.
Yeah, it was so inspiring because I mean the truth is there are some hard things that we need to reckon with in this generation. And yet there are still some really good things. And so that is definitely one of the stories that we want to highlight, is that it's not all bad. And even within the churches where bad things are happening, there's good and bad.
Yeah.
Like
Yep.
coffee's good. Some
Yes.
relationships are good.
Right.
There's some good values. And at the
Right.
same time, there could be a toxicity in a church, and still there could be people being baptized. There could be homeless people being fed. There could be great things happening, but it doesn't mean there aren't also bad things. I think in a culture where we're so polarized and there's no nuance left in our lives, we have to recognize, we have to open our eyes and say, even though you've experienced really good things here, there's still some work to do to weed out some of the bad things.
That's right. That's right.
So I know that, and as a woman pastor, you probably get asked a lot, or even stereotypes around you that you're going to bring up women issues or something like that. I mean, I've felt that myself.
Oh, yeah.
But I felt like in a Woman in the Church series, it wouldn't be fair to our listeners without
Yeah.
at least kind of talking on this for a second. So this is going to be our last major question here. So I did agree with this. You had this in the book. It said, this isn't just a women's rights issue, the issue of women in the church, women leadership. And these are, what you said here are things I've said so many times. People will say often, the issue of women leading in the church is a secondary issue. And I almost always respond exactly how you said this. You said, this isn't a women's rights issue or a justice issue or a gender issue. It's a gospel issue and a missional issue. And you tell this beautiful story about this woman, and we don't know how, it's just, there's a sadness because you tell the story of Laurel in your book, who, after you say, has been fighting toxic forms of patriarchy to the point of exhaustion, right? And you say, sadly, women do walk away from the church. Gifted, talented, and godly women become repulsed by the blatant rejection they experience. When the church holds women back, we suffer. We are missing out. And then, Laurel eventually realized that it wasn't worth the battle. And she took her gifts to corporate America, where she's actually thriving vocationally in her gifts. So describe to us what God intended to be a partnership, and that it turned into men lording over women and sinful systems in the church. How do you see that? What's your perspective?
Yeah, this vision that we have, that is a gospel-centered vision, is one of women and men in partnership, that that sons and daughters would prophesy, that women and men would partner in the power of the Holy Spirit, in partnership with God and the redemption of all creation, that together that we would bear witness. And as Carolyn Custis James always talks about, she says that the church will continue, for as long as women are held back, the church will continue to limp along. And so for me, this is why I often say this is a gospel issue, number one, because Galatians 3:28, right? Those barriers have been torn down. The cross levels it. We are all one. And number two, this is a missional issue because the church is going to continue to limp along. And so this isn't, for me, it's not about women's rights. It's not that I don't care about women's rights, by the way. I do.
Right.
And it's not that I don't care about justice. I do.
Yeah.
But I also think you probably agree with me. You and I did not go in ministry because we want to talk about women in ministry.
Right.
We didn't.
No.
When you were called into ministry, you probably were a lot like me. I don't know your full story, but where you just wanted to tell the world about Jesus. You were captivated by Jesus. You wanted to tell others about Jesus. And that's why you went into ministry.
Yeah.
Well, women end up talking about this because we still care about that. And we want to see the church live into its fullness.
Yeah.
And we happen to have an eye for when the church isn't living into its fullness, when women are being held back. And that's what we want, right? We want to see the church shine brightly. We want to see the church live in her full power. And for as long as women are being held back and they're not equal partners at the table, and again, not for equality's sake, but for missional sake,
right,
we're going to speak up about it because we care about the church.
Yes, so well said. And I do love Carolyn Custis James and her illustration there. I mean, if you have two legs, why wouldn't you use both of them, right? Somebody needs to be limping along and hopping on one foot.
Exactly.
And so that's why our heart breaks when we see it.
Right.
We see an imbalance, and we see it because we'll only see through the eyes of a woman. That's all we can see through.
That's right. That's right. Yep.
Yeah. And so, I think that, so many voices out there like Scott McKnight and other Graham Hill and just others that are even as from the male perspective, are seeing it too. And so hopefully this is a way we can go forward better together, because certainly a
Yes.
radiant church, the bride of Christ, we want her to be all that she was intended to be. And every generation is an opportunity. And we certainly
Amen.
waste this opportunity by going into the one-legged race when we were intended to
Yep.
walk on both feet.
Amen. Amen to that.
Well, is there
Yep.
anything else you would like to share with our listeners about, anything at all? What do you think that is important for us to know from Tara Beth Leach?
Yeah, at the outset of this book, I talk about how hard it is for those who love the church to hear any critiques against the church, or towards the church, I guess I should say. That when I first entered into seminary and when I heard my fellow seminarians have kind of a cynical eye or critique towards the church, I felt defensive because don't talk about my family that way. These are my people. This is my family. They raised me. They saved me. How could we talk about this? You know, and I get that there may be those who are feeling like that. They're tired and weary of the critiques. And also at the same time, I want to say that, my heart in critiquing the church is because I love the church and I believe in the church. And I believe that Jesus believes in us. And so I also recognize that there might be those who are tired of the critiques, but to those who are tired of the critiques, also remember how many are tired of being hurt and are
Mm,
tired of the toxic systems and how many we are losing.
yeah.
And also to those who are tired and are weary and are walking away from the church, I just want to say, Jesus sees you, Jesus is with you, and Jesus still believes in the church. And so, this critiquing, I believe, is an important process where so many are prophesying, if you will, and calling the church to a new and to a better way because we love Jesus and we believe in the words of Jesus and we believe that Jesus actually believes in us. So all that to say, yes, I'm critiquing, but man, I believe in the church.
Yeah. Well said. Well, I know that you definitely have a gift for communicating, and so as at this time, I think many people would benefit from kind of continuing to follow some of the things you're saying, even as life unfolds for all of us in the next few years. And so, let people know where they can find you in your writing, so they can continue to hear more of the things that you're saying.
Yeah, sure. They can find me at my website, tarabethleach.com, and sign up for newsletter or on social media. Both my Twitter and Instagram handle is tarabeth82. Or also I am on Facebook. Still not on TikTok.
I don't know. We might want to see your dance moves.
Yes.
Well, it's been an honor and a pleasure to interview you today, Tara Beth. And I just pray the richest blessings on you in your new season of ministry there back with your parents. And I know things are not easy right now, but just thank you for at a time where you could have been very inward in your own world, still speaking to us in the world and encouraging us to do better, to be a radiant church.
Thank you so much, Lori. And likewise, blessings to you. And thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Bye, Tara Beth.
Bye.
Well, I'm inspired. I'm inspired to see more of a radiant church here in North America and around the world. As I read Tara Beth's book, Radiant Church, often sitting by the ocean in Santa Cruz here in California and watching the waves and just longing to see God really just do a mighty work in the faith communities here in the United States at a time when COVID has been so hard and racial issues that were supposedly buried, but we knew they really weren't buried, became very, very prominent in the last year in the midst of all kinds of strife. Just the politics, just how things got so discombobulated in faith communities. And even the way she talks about in her book, just empire worship and sanctuaries and glitzy services that seem to distract from a king that we are called to worship, who is the only one who is worthy of our worship. So much got really confusing for a lot of people, and and it became really hard to see the radiance. But the call that she has given us to go back to the basics and the roots of who we are as a faith community just today in the podcast was really, really good. I hope that you came away inspired, even of the stories that she shared of the churches that are doing it so well. And I do encourage you to pick up her book, Radiant Church. You will find Tara Beth's just the way she writes to be very compelling. She doesn't skirt away from any of the hard issues, but her heart is out of love, and her heart is to see us do better together. And she points out things that are hard to recognize sometimes, but some things we actually know. We really know deep down that those are issues. And she says it in such a loving and compelling way to encourage us to come together and make the main thing once again. So I just really appreciate this book. It's so timely. I do encourage you to pick it up. Tara Beth Leach is the author, and it's Radiant Church, Restoring the Credibility of Our Witness. I know you're going to love it and underline it as much as I did. The next couple of guests we have coming up are a week from today, we'll have April Diaz, and she is the founder and CEO of Ezer and Company, which is basically providing life coaches for people all around the world. She's a certified life coach, speaker, author, and advocate for women basically everywhere. And she's a visionary. She's been a challenger her entire life. When she sees things that need fixing or need maximizing, she definitely has just a gift for noticing those and helping people work through those. She's just got such drive and leadership and wants to see women work toward wholeness in life and leadership in full partnership with men and faith communities. And she's pastored for nearly 20 years in some of the most influential churches in the U.S., so she has a lot of experience. She also lives here in California in Orange County. And another friend here in California is going to be on the show too, Bronwyn Lee, and she's South African, in fact, but she's a pastor here in California, and she's going to be speaking about her latest book as well. And so these two ladies are coming up soon, and I know you're going to look forward to hearing them as much as I have just really enjoyed getting to know them and interview them and read some of the writing that they're putting out there. So I hope everyone has a great week, and we'll talk to you next week. Bye. As we're finishing this episode, if you're thinking, I really wish I could learn more or go a little bit deeper, well, that's what our Difference Maker community is for. I would love to welcome you in to join the rest of us there. Once again, it's only $5 a month to join, the price of a latte at your local coffee shop. You can join at our Changers tier. Difference Makers is a community that really means so much to me. It's very special because each time I have a guest on the show, I record something outside of what we give to just the regular podcast audience, where we go a little bit deeper, and then I post those video episodes in this community and we can discuss them. But also at the very beginning tier, which is our Changers tier of this community, you'll get exclusive voting power and help pick podcast topics that give us, more of what we want from your perspective. You'll have access to exclusive 30 plus mini-sodes that aren't out there for the general public. And you'll get every month an exclusive monthly bonus mini-sode. At our Groundbreakers level, which is $10 a month, you can join and get all of that, but also priority access to submit questions to the podcast. And you'll get an additional 2 exclusive monthly bonus mini-sodes. And at our Trailblazers tier, which is $15 a month, the price of 3 lattes a month, you can get all of that, plus also 3 exclusive monthly bonus minisodes, and a patron shout out. So I would love for you to join us at any of those tiers. It'll help you come into this community, be in the midst of all of us, other difference makers, and we'd love to hear your perspective. I certainly would. It's a place to engage more with me and the audience around what you like, what you're resonating with, and once again, go deeper with each of our guests. So please join us in this membership community. I would love to hear your perspective and love to share this extra content with you. So show up at patreon.com/a world of difference.